some of them became overmanned and became within courts inefficient. Instead of being able to correct them, very often political manipulation both from the central government and from the local state governments led to the further burdening of the state public enterprises with responsibilities which they were not created to perform. The third problem that has come up, and Kerala's performance is particularly impressive in this context, is the onset of, that onset had happened in countries like the United States and Britain from the late 1970s, had spread to Latin America in the 1980s, but it really came with a furor of a cyclone from 1991. It had already started with the first budget of the Rajiv Gandhi's government in 1985. That is basically the mantra that promote rich man's wealth, do everything in order to do that, and it is that which will then trickle down for the welfare of the people. But in fact, that has never happened either in India or in any other country. Inequality in the world is at a historic high. One of my distinguished young friends has titled one of his lectures, Inequality, the Silent Pandemic. In India, that pandemic is even almost as virulent as in countries like Brazil and now China. Now, under these circumstances, one of the temptations of the state governments was to say, well, we cannot beat these people, so let us try to deal with them. Invite the private sector people to invest in our country. But the private sector people had tasted blood for a very long time. The workers' blood everywhere. And they did not want any government which was responsible to the demands of the workers or the poor peasants today to be in control of a region where they thought they would invest. And the Kerala government has shown through this way they have revived these enterprises that is not necessarily the route to growth in investment either. Because there are other public sector enterprises at the central level. Some of the best manufacturing enterprises in India, all the big banks in India which have performed very well are public sector enterprises. And it is much more important to get in touch and to interact with public sector enterprises at the state level and at the central government public sector level in order to be able to get new ideas of new technology, investment in necessary cases, in complementary areas, and continue to have communication. Now, there are experts here who will talk about what the Kerala government has been able to do. Mr. Balakrishnan will present in detail what the government has done, so I will not take much more of your time. I will only mention one experience in my own long unsuccessful career as an unofficial advisor to governments. In 1987, under the auspices of the ILO, I had published a book for which I had worked in 83 to 85 on industrial restructuring in China, India and South Korea. I believe this was the first book written by an Indian sitting in India on these countries. And there I had found that the president of dictatorial South Korea, Park Chung-hee and his successors, had conducted a meeting, monthly meeting with the economic planners. There was an economic planning board. One of the lies that was propagated by the World Bank cronies was that the East Asian miracle was performed on the basis of free markets. Nothing like that. And the president used to conduct these monthly meetings where he would set targets for production, exports, and decide on the allocation of scarce foreign exchange. And this is how South Korea, from being a country which was dominated by agriculture exactly as India was in 1950s, became one of the most industrialized nations in East Asia, and by now one of the industrialized nations in the world, with a higher per capita income than many of the countries of Latin America, which were much richer earlier. Now I think South Korean per capita income is approaching South European levels. Now, after that, just to end that, there is a circular given to the universities and the social science research institutions from the HRD ministry in the central government, saying that if you have done any research on East Asian economics, please let us know. I sent the details of what I have done, never heard from them again. And I don't think that anybody who had then pushed forward the kinds of reforms that are initiated from 1985 had paid any attention to the real East Asian experience, let alone in 1991. Now, I am very happy that this seminar is being organized, as other people have said before me. I hope this will be an example to other state governments to do the kinds of things that this Kerala government has been able to do. I found in my search on state public sector enterprises in the economic and political wiki that the only papers that were there were papers on how to privatize these enterprises. What is the kind of due diligence process that should be observed and so on. No idea that they could in fact be made much more productive than they are now and could serve the kinds of public purposes for which they were created. I again thank all of you for giving me this opportunity to speak here, and again thank the government of Kerala, Mr. Karim and his team for inviting me to chair this very important session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Ladies and gentlemen, those were the opening remarks from the distinguished chair of this session. Ladies and gentlemen, it indeed is an honor to have Sri K. N. Chandrasekhar, Union Cabinet Secretary, to be inaugurating the technical session. Sri K. N. Chandrasekhar is an IAS officer from Kerala Cadre and is current Union Cabinet Secretary. He has earlier served as a Revenue Secretary in the Government of India. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege to request Sri K. N. Chandrasekhar to kindly give us an observance.
Mr. Chairman, Professor Babji, Honorable Industry Minister of Kerala, Honorable Members of Parliament, I recognize members of the Planning, Professor Vijit Sen, in particular, member of the Planning Commission, and all the distinguished delegates who are present here, my good friends. Please let me first acknowledge with gratitude the kind invitation extended to me by the state government to speak at this function. I have not seen the presentation. As a matter of fact, the presentation was supposed to come up before my speech, but I have gone through it in great detail. And I must congratulate the Honorable Minister and his team for the extremely good work that seems to have been done during previous year, a year in which we faced an economic crisis all over the world, with which we were grappling with both at the central and the state level. I have probably, that is the reason why I was called here, I have some experience of industry during my career. In fact, I was Industry Secretary of Kerala from 1991 to 94. I was chairman of the Kerala State Industries Development Corporation when I was Finance Secretary of Kerala between 1994 to 96. I have been chairman, managing director, or member of board of directors of more than 40 public sector companies or cooperatives, as also private sector and joint sector companies. In fact, Professor Kurian would recall that we had worked together on the same board of the Kerala State Cooperative Marketing Federation long ago in distant past. I am also presently chairman of the committee secretaries to evaluate the performance of central public sector undertakings and to determine which schedule they should go to, plus being chairman of search cum selection committees for major central public sector undertakings. As well as many times I have to look at the revival plans of public sector enterprises, even though the principal responsibility is with the Bureau for Reconstruction of Public Sector, BRPSC, Bureau for Reconstruction of Public Sector Enterprises, the chairman of which is also present here today. I must at the outset say, probably because I have been so closely associated with public sector undertakings, probably because I have worked for so long in industry, I do believe that public sector undertakings have a key role to play in the growth and rebuilding of India from time to time. In fact, during the early days, immediately after India's independence, it was primarily the public sector that ventured into really difficult areas like infrastructure. Our steel mills, our fertilizer factories would not have come up but for heavy public sector investment. And I think that did lay the foundation for future growth. The public sector has also been going into areas of activity which were initially considered viable, unviable by the private sector, and then opened up these areas, which made it possible for the private sector also to come in. And of course, public sector undertakings act in accordance with national strategies. And this, I think, was very clearly visible during the economic crisis of last year. In fact, one major component for our economic recovery was the role played by public sector banks in providing liquidity, which, along with the various fiscal measures that the government took to stimulate demand, we were able to recover from the economic crisis